Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest in our webcasts dealing with shared services, global business services, and in this case, data-driven business processes. So we're very pleased to have you here. We have people from around the world in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. So I know for some of you it's very late in the evening, and some of you it's very early in the morning. So good to have you all with us. So this is our webcast. Many of you know me. I'm Dan French. I'm founder and CEO of Consider Solutions. I won't say anything more about myself, although I normally look a bit happier than that photograph on the left. Steve Fox, I'm very pleased to introduce. He does look that happy in real life, and he is the former VP Global Business Services at Thermo Fisher Scientific and now Process Excellence Leader. Welcome, Steve.
Very good. Thank you, Dan.
So in this session, we've got 45 minutes with you. We're going to try and make best use of that. I'm going to give a brief introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about the opportunities behind data, which we all know. So I'm going to challenge a little bit more about some of the mythology and some of the gotchas that we're trying to get through. And between Steve and myself, we're going to talk about the business challenge in alignment, persuasion, and decision-making. Those are essential things about business processes. And we're going to talk through from Steve's experience about this 7-step approach to making this an effective data-driven business process approach. And he's got a case study for us, so looking forward to that. And I'll have some thoughts for the road. And we'll also have time for a few questions at the end, we hope. So please ask questions as you go through. There is a Q&A panel, or a Q panel, on the GoToWebinar interface. So ask questions as they come into your mind, pop them in, and we'll endeavor to answer them at the end. For those who don't have time to answer live, we'll answer by email. So there should be a lot of thought-provoking stuff here, so I'm expecting lots of questions, so thank you. So let's be doing that. If you have any technical issues as well, go into the same panel and we'll do our best to help you out. So that's what we're going to be talking about, and there's some really interesting insights have come here, both from Steve's experience and some broader discussions and engagements we've been running. So those of you who know Consider Solutions, you know a bit about us. This is really just our perspective, so it kind of gives you a sense about why we're having this conversation and the way we approach it. So, you know, this is our aspiration, if you like, and the aspiration of the organizations we work with. So on the left-hand side, you see this idea of helping drive better business results, reduce the cost of finance and operations, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. And we deliver that through the pillars on the right-hand side. So financial control and compliance, broader enterprise risk management, and this whole issue of process transformation and process optimization, which is really the essence of the topic today, although it does bleed into some of the other topics as well. And obviously technology and data are a key platform for that. And we can't do this alone. So many of you on the call we have worked with for many years, as well as giving us, you know, a lot of challenging engagements and ideas to work through. They also ask us to kind of break through new thought leadership, new ideas, and so that's one of the drivers for delivering this session today and many of the others we run. So thank you and all the other customers who are with us today. So first of all, there's going to be a few polls. I think there's 5 polls today. It's just to keep you awake and keep you engaged. This is very simple. They're all anonymous, so don't worry about it. It's just to help inform you and us about the nature of the conversation we're having as we go ahead. So this is, how do you describe your role? It's not necessarily what's on your email footer or on your business card. It's how do you self-describe? Are you 1, primarily shared services or global business services, 2, primarily finance, 3, IT or IS, 4, another business function, or 5, a consultant or advisor? Very simple. Let's have a look. Hopefully that's a very easy thing for you to answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, oh, interestingly enough, nearly half of you are consultants and advisors. Well, there's a turn up. But second to that are shared services and GBS folks. So, well, that's good. That's an unusual breakdown in audience today. So thank you for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about data opportunity and mythology. In the opportunity, I mean, I love this quote. You know, he's very old, or in fact, long dead now, I think, Edward Deming. But his quote here, he was the father of process excellence, really the father of lean and quality management framework, and he kind of really helped the Japanese auto industry in the 50s and 60s, which kind of gave rise to a lot of stuff that we're benefiting from now. But his quote was, without data, you're just another person with an opinion, which I think is wonderful and never more relevant than now. But when we talk, when we talk to you guys, when we talk to customers, we talk to organizations around the world, the biggest, the best organizations, the best performing organizations even, they tell us this, and it's a consistent story. Yeah, the majority of effort in finance and operations is with regard to trying to make decisions is in acquiring and preparing data. And as little as a fifth of it is for value-added analysis and decision making. I always found that hard to believe, but the more I talk about it, and even in a much smaller business, I see this myself, it is very much the case, and we haven't really cracked the code on this, and it's time we did. Another little reference here, there's a famous poem by Samuel Coleridge called The Ancient Mariner, and one of the memorable quotes is, "Water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink." And the interesting relevance of this is, if you imagine you're this ancient mariner afloat for months on end on a little boat with no supplies on the ocean, you're desperate for water, but of course the water you're floating on isn't drinkable because it's salt water. So I think that's quite an interesting analogy. We all know every business today has got terabytes and whatever the next one up is, zettabytes of data on every topic you can imagine, but we're not really able to use it in a meaningful way. So these are some of the questions you can ask yourself about business operations today. I won't go into them in any detail because it's all pretty obvious, but the fact is the answer isn't pretty. So that's kind of worth thinking about. And then I think a simpler way of looking at that is when you look at data with respect to business processes under your control or business processes in which you're a stakeholder or a participant, are you getting the whole picture about what's really going on? Are you getting a bit of a half-filled jigsaw puzzle? And I love the picture on the right. Do all the facts line up, or is it a kind of a sad state of a civil engineering project gone a bit wrong? So these are kind of things, they're kind of funny, but they're kind of sadly true. So yeah, worth thinking about. Now, when we talk about business processes in your business, or in from your own perspective, what of the core relevant business processes is top priority for improvement? Now, I realize I could have had 8 or 9 core business processes here, but the wonders of GoToWebinar says I only have 5 potential answers and 1 has to be other. So that's why I've got those 4. So of these, which is the highest priority for you in your business right now after 8 months of COVID or 7 months of COVID? Is it customer to cash, the revenue cycle? Is it source or purchase to pay, the expense cycle? Is it record to report, which is general accounting or financial closure? Is it hire to retire, which is people, talent, and culture? Or is it another process? Because we're talking about processes, so what's at top of mind at the moment? Let's see what you say. Again, it's anonymous, so let's have a look and see what you say. So the number one, nearly half of you, purchase to pay. That's not a big surprise. The revenue cycle close behind, which I'd expect to see. Record a report up there, I can understand that. And then hire to retire. Okay, well, that's good feedback, thank you. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that business forecast is unsettled at the moment. We've had 2020 wasn't anything any of us expected, and it isn't, the unsettled weather isn't stopping anytime soon. So we've got another 6 months, year or more of this. So kind of it's important for us to think about that and recognize how we're going to respond to it business-wise. I know everybody here is dealing with a similar set of challenges. I mean, what's interesting about COVID is, for all of the bad things about it, and there's a lot of bad stuff, there's some amazing business results that have been achieved. If you just think about the fact that in a matter of days and weeks, organizations, the biggest organizations on the planet, turned on a dime and managed to move to remote working, highly effective, incredibly quickly. So, and that was an amazing achievement. Everybody should be very proud of that. And we were all part of that. And it's great we did it. But it's also led to an expectation that faster response and action is possible. We, perhaps our previous timescales are no longer as the benchmark they used to be. Remote separated work has become the norm. And everything we do, both as consumers and as business people, is more contactless interfaces and interactions. And that's led to this further drive to integrated end-to-end processes. We need that. We need to make sure they're touchless and connected, and the accelerated digitization, the need for it. So all of that is key. And underpinning all that, we've continued to hear these mantras of data's a new oil, it's a new electricity, it's a new something or other. It's very, very important, we know that, which is this is amazing what we've achieved in a matter of months, but it's also raised expectations and it's raised the stakes. So okay, so it's cautious optimism on that, because we're expected to do a lot more than we did before. So think about, in calmer times, we used to, not long ago, when something happened in business, we'd look, okay, what happened last quarter and what happened last year? That's sort of the looking backwards view. And then in much more dynamic times, you've got to focus on what's going on now, what's going on yesterday, all of this stuff, what's happening right now, and we need to know what can happen. And this kind of image, I think, is a much better way of thinking about the dynamism of what happens in business. But we're in a whole new world now also, which is not just dynamic, we need that, but it's also this idea of transforming the way of operating, all of things about how do we change stuff we didn't think we changed before. And that's a driverless car, in case anybody was wondering. It's not a Volkswagen Beetle. Well, it might be, but it's a self-driving one. Transformative times, how can we make it happen? How can we make change? What levers can we press to make a big change? So I think it's important to think about that. But when we get into the challenges, those of you who know me will recognize that I've been talking about Dunning-Kruger for the past couple of years since I discovered it. But it's 20 years old piece of psychological research, and I encourage you to read about it if you haven't, because it's really relevant to business and it's relevant to us as humans, and we all suffer from it. So if you know about this, or even if I'm going to explain it, it'll become obvious. It's easy to laugh and think, yes, I used to work for someone like that. The truth is, we all operate this way to an extent, and we've got to challenge ourselves with this. And in terms of what we're trying to achieve, make sure we recognize these cognitive biases, of which this is one. And the basic essence of this is that despite however bright we are, when we don't have a lot of skill and experience of a particular topic, we can form an opinion and come to decisions and be incredibly confident about that. You can see that in public life. You can be incredibly confident about stuff you know very little about. But if you have the fortune or misfortune to have to execute on those decisions or opinions, you find that the devil's in the detail. It's very nuanced. It's really hard. And halfway through, you think maybe this isn't even doable. And if you're fortunate enough to drive all the way through to getting a result and you become an expert, you do become confident, but you're never as confident as you were when you were a naive optimist. And it's really, really interesting. And we all suffer from it. And this is absolutely what's happening at the forefront of the data-driven culture. We've got such high expectations of, yes, we got all this data, let's exploit it, we can do it, let's go, I want that done, I want to be like that in 3 months or 6 months or whatever. It's just not quite that simple. So hopefully you identify with that Dunning-Kruger, but it affects loads of things. So we can come back on that. But all of this, the real challenge with data and the data-driven culture, it isn't a technical one. It's a human challenge. It's about communication, collaboration, understanding. And I'm going to demonstrate this, and Steve is going to talk through some of the examples in the case study. But here's this classic picture, complicated diagram, and then wonderful stuff on the right-hand side. And somewhere in the middle, then a miracle occurs. And the piece on the left is all of the data science and the complex work we're doing about data sources and mapping and data architecture and data definitions. On the right-hand side, business people are trying to drive business progress. And when you ask the folks on the left, they say, well, this is what we're trying to do, but I'm not a business person, so you have to speak to those guys. And then you speak to the business stakeholders and say, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. And I'm very pleased we've got these data people working on this, but I'm not technical, so I'm hoping they're doing what I'm expecting. So this is this is still a very, very relevant picture. Now, what do those human behavioral challenges look like? Well, I'm going to talk through several of them. And again, they're all human challenges. They're not technical. The first one is scope. When we're talking about end-to-end processes and connecting with consumers and suppliers, in a seamless, contactless way, we're talking about real long-run processes, which in business we've not been that great at doing. And here's an example. And there's lots of stakeholders, lots of people involved, and lots of people with different opinions. That is difficult. There's a broader issue of complexity about global geographic reach, the multitude of systems, the way in which our architectures work. And it's a bit like this ball of string. As you pull on the string, yeah, I'll get to the end of it, and who knows? Complexity is a big issue for major organizations. And this is a big one. None of us want to admit this, but in a lot of business processes, if you say for an end-to-end process, what does good look like? It's not quite as easy to respond as you might think, or as we like to think, maybe. So are we clear on what good looks like for an end-to-end process? And that is really important for us to collaborate and discuss that, and it isn't as obvious as we think. And in performance management, we all have KPIs these days. We've got lots of KPIs, but KPIs on an end-to-end process gets complicated when each function has its own performance measures, its own incentives, and so the KPIs are slightly different. Sometimes the same information used to measure different things in different ways. And that's why the watermelon's here. We have this idea that we're very keen to show KPIs performance as green rather than yellow or red. But when you dig into a lot of green KPI results, you're saying, you know what? That's a bit of a watermelon. That's green on the outside, but red inside. So, and to give you an example, here's a set of KPIs for purchase pay. It could be, ones for order to cash or hire to retire, but there's a bunch of supposedly best practice KPIs, a lot of them. But it's not easy to separate out the leading indicators from the lagging indicators. Some of these things are maybe important in particular initiatives, but may not be important to the end result. And some of them are actually mutually conflicting. So it's all very easy to say, oh, we've got these KPIs and these are, I got these from a benchmarking activity. But is this actually helping you in terms of measuring performance and driving improvement? And then you've got this whole issue of silos, not just physical silos of data, which still clearly exist, even with wonders of big cloud databases and all the rest of it. It's the silos about ownership and interpretation. Does the data get understood and interpreted and used in the same way? And do we mean the same things by the same data? And these are human collaboration issues. The data itself, complex. So we go through ways of representing an architecture, representing how the data relates, but it's context, it's nuance, it's usage. Is a purchase order, does it mean the same thing when it's created as when it's released? Well, sort of, but not quite. And then tech. And I don't just mean technology, I mean technology and technique. We've got some great tools, but again, it's only part of the answer. We've got some conventional data analytics, which are very, very powerful, but you do need to know what the business rules are, and you've got to be able to basically define those in some form of script or red flag, Boolean logic. And there's a bunch of issues with that. And then we've got the advent of machine learning, which has been around a long time, but the volume of data and processing powers made this a very popular approach, where we get rid of the logic idea and we work on hypotheses using large bodies of data to work out what are norms and what are not norms or abnormal. But it's not suited to all types of questions. There's issues about bias, both data bias and bias of the people behind the algorithms. It's not simple. And this again isn't nirvana. This isn't the silver bullet. And we've got visualization, some great visualization capabilities, great for engagement. But if the underlying heavy lifting that gives us the insight isn't there, what we're doing. And a great comment here by the chief digital officer of one of our customers is, we've done all this stuff, but the new problems are still the old problems. And then let's talk about skills and capabilities. I mean, there's a whole bunch of technical skills that we're all busy sort of developing in our organizations on the left-hand side. But then what are the soft skills that make this actually work in reality? And this is a great chart here by the Business Partnering Institute, which I recommend you look into. But I like these 4 quadrants: the analytical skills, the business skills, the leadership skills, and the people skills. We need all of those to combine with the technical skills to make a data culture and data-driven processes really work. So how are we going to do that? Does one person have all that in one head or not? So despite all our excitement and our hope, maybe we're still missing the target. And my assertion, I think our collective assertion, is that we clearly are, because the evidence is there. It's it's taking us too long, and we're still not getting what we need. And I would really put it down as this little picture here. If you've ever been to IKEA, you know what this picture is about. But it all made sense when it was originally explained. I wanted a chair. I can see it's a chair, but I'm not going to sit on it. So we're not light years apart. We know we're in the right zone, but we've still got some way to go to make sure this is timely and effective. So before I hand over to Steve, I want to ask you a couple more questions. Again, these are anonymous. So given what we've talked about how we use data, how effective do you say your data is in helping measure process performance, in measuring process performance, so how well we're doing? So 1, is it limited effectiveness, need to improve? 2, has it got monthly KPIs, but little indicator of what's wrong? 3, weekly indicators? 4, highly effective on a daily basis? And 5, I don't know. So this is about process performance specifically, measuring how we're doing. How well are we doing? So what would you say? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Let's see what we got there. Let us 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's just your best guess judgment. Let's have a look. So okay, so about 87% of you are, well, so nearly 50% are limited effectiveness. And of course, these numbers are skewed because a lot of you are consultants, of course. So, but then the second one is monthly KPIs. Okay, so, and a few don't know. So nobody's in the highly effective, but we're only just talking about process performance. What about the second level? How effective is the data we use in enabling process improvement in our business? So let's have a look at this. Again, limited effectiveness for process improvement. Monthly insight, process issues, defects and outliers. Weekly insight, highly effective on a daily basis, or I don't know. So let's have a look. So this is about, last one was about process performance. This one is about process improvement. How well is our data working for us in that? Let's have a look at that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Have we got? Look what we're looking at. Right. So get much bigger level of right. So process improvement. We know that's not so good. Okay, that's great. And one more, just to excite you. So how effective is data enabling process? Enabling stakeholder collaboration and alignment. So talking about decision making in business, decision making isn't random executives making independent decisions, we hope. It's about collaboration, winning hearts and minds, and alignment across functions. So how effective is data enabling stakeholder collaboration and alignment? Again, is it limited effectiveness? Is it monthly insight into process behavior? 3, weekly insight? 4, daily insight? 5, I don't know. So this is really enabling collaboration across the organization. So how would you look at this? Let's have a look at the old scoreboard. How are we doing? So it's about how this information is being used to collaborate and bring people together about potential courses of action. So it's the precursor to decision making. Okay, let's have a look at there. Some of you are finding this a bit hard, so let's have a look, see what we got. Okay, so we're back to kind of pretty much to phase 1, but again, I think we're agreed. It's a challenge. So thank you for that. So before I hand over to Steve, I just want to ask you, I hope you've already got questions from what I've already discussed, because there's some key points there. So ask those questions through the GoToWebinar interface. I'm very pleased to welcome Steve Fox. I've introduced him already. I will introduce him again. Former VP GBS at Thermo Fisher. And Steve's going to talk to us about this concept of business science. We talk a lot about data science, but what's business science all about? And a case study. Steve, over to you.
Very good. Thanks, Dan. Nice work, and thanks for framing.
You, Steve.
Dan, you got me?
Are you muted or not muted?
No, I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Can I hear you, Steve?
Yeah.
Can't hear you.
Dan, can you hear me?
Well, I hope the wildfires of California haven't got to your building already. Okay.
Dan, I'm not muted.
Everyone can hear Steve except me. So carry on.
Very good. Okay. Hey, so Dan, thanks for framing the challenges surrounding the data. There's many of them, and they're complex. So what I'm going to do now is just share a framework that I've utilized to bridge the gap between our complex data landscape and making effective data-driven business decisions. And so you're all familiar with kind of the schematic here on the left with people, process, and technologies. And as we've migrated to much more of a data-oriented businesses, all of us, right? Data is really at the heart and centric to everything. It touches our people, our process, and our technologies. We've all heard about data science and the advent of the data scientist role. Many, some of you on this call may be data scientists, or some of you on the call may be sitting next to data scientists in your organization. And to level set on this a little bit, I'd like to just start with some definitions of both data science and business science. So you can read through these, but just to summarize, data science is the process of extracting knowledge from many data forms, and business science is the process of converting that knowledge into actionable insights that drive business outcomes. So with that as our background, right, when business science is applied correctly, it changes the way we think, right? I know I used to always look to technology and data to solve my process issues, when what I really needed was to do was a much better job of defining my objective, aligning with stakeholders, communicating with stakeholders and all of the process kind of owners and functional leads. And then if we, Dan talked a lot about culture and behavior, and then I need to do a much better job of developing a culture that's focused on insights, right, versus data, and focused on action versus just mere observations. So business science should be the pillar supporting how we operate. We've got principles, core capabilities, some user experience ideas here. I'm going to focus on one from each of these. If we're applying business science correctly, we should be business outcome focused. I'm going to talk about this when we go through the 7 steps. We really need to be business outcome focused and take into consideration, obviously, all of our stakeholder insights and stakeholder influences there. It's really important around core capability to understand the data, the nuances of data, right? Dan had mentioned earlier, the same component of data may be looked at differently, interpreted differently, and have much different meanings to people within the same within the same end-to-end process. So it's important to take that into consideration, and that's an exercise in communication, right? It's an exercise in getting feedback, and quite frankly, it's an exercise in educating yourselves and ourselves on what the different data states mean to different folks involved in the process. And then finally, around user experience, right? It's important that we tailor our message to the various audience we have. I focus here on target personas, right? In that we do have people that are interested in things on a daily basis, that are very detailed and involved in the day-to-day activities. We also have people that I like to refer to as trend seekers. They're looking at things on a weekly or a monthly or even a quarterly basis. And finally, I think we've got what I refer to as strategic influencers that really look at things at a higher level that can really influence our ability to get things done, maybe to get the resources we need to take the next step in our process. So targeting or focusing our message and our communications to the various audiences we want and need to influence is a key part of business science. So here is the 7 steps to help us better utilize data in our businesses. So I'm going to walk through. I've got a case study. I'm going to walk through each of these, and you will see these 7 steps a number of times over the next 10 minutes or so. This is a framework I've utilized, turn data into actionable insights with specific business outcome or outcomes in mind. But before I get into the case study, I just want to share with you a few things I believe business science enables us as leaders to do and do better, right? Key part here is being able to anticipate, right, where we're going to need resources. It's going to allow us, or better allows us, to improve and fix processes, even processes that we may not directly own, right? That could be upstream or downstream of the functions that we own. But it's key to be able to leverage business science to first identify those, right, and then to influence, to get people on our, kind of on our side, if you will, of the fence to help us improve what needs to be done to really drive more end-to-end efficiency. Next, I like to refer to and talk to risk and compliance, right? And this is the action here is not just identifying it. We talk about it, I highlighted identify here, but really is to be proactive in this, right? And to have a mechanism or mechanisms in place to help us identify these risks arguably before there's any loss realized or any significant loss realized. I've talked a lot about influencing stakeholders already, but the big factor here is around collaboration, alignment, and communication. And in, I'll say, real business terms, being able to negotiate better pricing, better terms and conditions with suppliers, with customers is a real tangible outcome of deploying a business science strategy. And then finally, and I tell us, say this to the end, I think it's arguably the most important part of all this, and really a nice summary is, hey, the processes we own, right? If we can tell the story of the process, we can kind of give some sense to, here's where we've been, right? Here's the things we've overcome or the things we've had to deal with. Here's where we are today, right? So you can get a sense for, for the current state. But most importantly, here's where we want to go. and that, here's the roadmap, or here's how I think we can get there. Telling that story of the process is really a key function and outcome of deploying a business science model. So I want to jump into the case study, and this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. This case study, you saw the slide earlier with Dan, is in the procure, purchase to pay, source to pay, however you think about it in your organization. Dan mentioned it, right? We got lots of inputs, lots of outputs, lots of stakeholders, lots of customers internally and externally of the process, lots and lots of data components. And so at the end of the day, right, we all know this is a pretty complex process landscape. So step one, right? What's the desired process opportunity, objective, or outcome? So with the example I'm sharing with you today in the case study, I mean, we focused on three main areas. It was process, value creation, and the employee experience aspect of this, which really drives to the behaviors and cultural aspect. So if you think about the process bit, we were focused on purposeful, incremental, very much with intent process improvement. This wasn't an exercise of blowing something up, right, and starting over, right? My experience in the team's experience that I brought together for this exercise and this effort was that typically those things take too long. You rarely get the intended value out of it. So we were looking at, hey, let's just be very precise, right, with the process improvement initiatives we put in place. We knew we had a lack of insight and really a lack of view to how our suppliers were performing for us, right? I mean, a lot of times in a lot of businesses, especially in the P2P space, it's easy to forget we're the customer, right? And that our suppliers are there for us. And a lot of times the way the relationships work, it may be arguably in a sole source environment, it doesn't feel that way. And maybe quite frankly, it's not that way. But this was really an exercise of looking at our supply base and trying to do a better job. First of all, just knowing how they're performing for us, but do a better job of holding them accountable for that performance. And then thirdly, on the process side, was really looking at KPIs and doing a better job of defining them across the process, end to end, and also as we benchmark these things, then looking for I'll say reasonable but aggressive targets for improvement year over year. On the value creation side, our CFO was not going to let us embark on anything of any significance without a targeted focus on improving working capital, which in the P2P space, and a lot of times, at least in her eyes, was focused on the DPO metric. We thought about this as a team and said, hey, wouldn't it be really nice if we come up with some really tangible bottom line impact? And so that was another opportunity here. And then as we talk about the employee experience side, this was really an exercise in education and employee development. We feel like we did a good job of that, bringing people in. We'd have an engaged team that was really then focused on establishing a data-driven culture. So when you look at the process universe, so that's the second step, is defining this. This probably isn't much unlike a lot of yours, right? Excuse me. Obviously there's an ERP in place. We had a workflow tool. T&E was actually part of the exercise here. We did have a little bit of outsourced AP. We had the e-procurement suite, so kind of online ordering, online cataloging, supplier contract database that we had to kind of take into consideration. One thing here, kind of in the middle of that vendor master data, I'll tell you, that was something that we woefully underestimated at the beginning of this, and we learned a lot through the exercise that we went through in developing our data set and going through the business science steps here. I'm walking through that. Vendor master data, really, really important, and something that did not get enough attention. So if we move on here, third step is defining and identifying the measures, process improvement, both leading and lagging, right? So think about these as KPIs. Now, we had a really I'll say fun discussion, if you will, with all the stakeholders that were involved, and like I mentioned earlier, our CFO wasn't going to let us get away with not having DPO, right, as a key performance indicator. So that was going to be there. But then we looked at and thought about, hey, what is this? How do we assess the overall process? So Dan showed a chart before with like 10 or 12 different KPIs, and and quite frankly, we started with a list of about 20, and we wanted to really narrow it down to be a little more precise. But we centered on percent of invoices paid on time, and the idea here is not so much that we wanted to pay everything on time, because that kind of conflicts a little bit with maximizing DPO and working capital. But the idea here was we wanted to have the option, right, to be able to manage our payment process, and we couldn't do that if we didn't have invoices in the system on time. So that's why we centered on that metric. But again, there's any number of variations here that depending on the importance and the specific challenges you and your businesses are trying to overcome, you could address with different KPIs. Let me go back. So 4 here, sorry about that, is defining the key elements of business value in the process. So this was a pretty significant mapping exercise we went through. And if you're focusing on the top row here of demand, sourcing, and contracting, right? This is all somewhat, I'll say in a lot of ways can be viewed as strategic, right? And identifying, the value in demand in the various business units or organizational units as we define them that are involved here and what their needs are. Sourcing, I think, is with vendor assessment, vendor selection, right? Is pretty self-explanatory. You need to do a good job there, and quite frankly, where do you spend the money, right? That's a big part of the sourcing aspect here, and how do you have vendors compete with one another? Thirdly was on contracting, right? And again, a very key part of, as we dove into our contract database and dove into our vendor master data, is that terms and conditions and the pricing we put in place are actually critical and really set the stage for what we have to deal with kind of on the back end, which is the bottom of this, the transactional aspect of this, which is where there's a lot of effort, a lot of resources, a lot of time consumed. This is around, obviously the PO process, the receipt process, and then ultimately the settlement process. So if we look at step 5, so here's where we focus on the volume metrics. And again, this was a fun conversation for all of us to have together. Lots was learned, lots was shared. We understood people's perspectives a lot better after going through this exercise, obviously, than before. But this was focused on, where we ended up was focused on throughput and volume and backlog. So if you look at, invoices approved, the invoice backlog, purchase orders created, goods receipt recorded, payments made, you can see, these probably are all, fairly familiar to most of you. And this was just, again, an exercise in identifying where we settled on was throughput and backlog, really the key productivity metrics in P2P. So no matter how finely tuned your systems are, how foolproof all of us think our processes are, or how experienced our people are, right? Defects happen, right? Defects are the things that cause the chaos within our process. And so we focused on defects in the conversations we had that could result in financial loss. You can see some of the examples here. Obviously duplicate payments was a pretty common item, but duplicate payments, bad vendor master file data, right? And then receipt issues. So when we thought about defects, we were defining defects. We were identifying ones that could have financial loss. There's a lot of other defects, right, that we could talk about here. I talked about invoice backlog before. A common defect that I've used in the past is invoices that don't have we get invoices in that don't either get approved timely or don't have GR, don't have goods receipt. So there's a whole nother work stream around that, right, with the supplier contacting us and following up, and then we have to respond. So I think the defect function, the defect consideration here is key. So then the 7th step, and kind of the final item I'll go through here relative to the process, is recognizing risk and compliance questions that we need to address. The key ones we focused on were PO compliance, and then we had some SOD issues that we wanted to make sure at least were flagged up routinely and quickly. The exercise for us at this point in time is we were really looking to go to a no PO, no pay process, and that the compliance around that was critical. So that's why that kind of bubbled to the top here. And also we were going through an exercise of aligning security within our ERP. And so the segregation of duties issues was a key item that was raised by our internal audit partners. So you take all this together, and here's the assembly of those 7 keys, right? And so this was our daily was and is our daily dashboard, right? That focuses on, kind of the productivity metrics at the top, some of the defect and some of the KPIs in the middle section there. We talk about goods receipt and invoices paid on time. Then the bottom section is again much more focused on defects and the segregation of duty and PO compliance issue I just mentioned. So what this, where this got us was to a daily dashboard that we could leverage for a few different audiences, but very much gave us a daily, weekly, even monthly, quarterly look at the business and the productivity of the process. So next level of business science is leveraging like a dashboard like that to drive down to the detailed transactional activity. So this is an example of really going from the dashboard to the detail. You could see the key example here is on that one where we had a PO created 36 days after the invoice date. So obviously that's a problem, right? So this is an example of taking us to that level of detail. The next item here is really looking at the ability to go from insight to action. So this is an example of business units within the company that were performing well around PO compliance, and some that were, had some challenges or weren't quite up to snuff, if you will. And nobody wanted to be on the left-hand side of this, and this wasn't an exercise in public shaming, but it was really an exercise in getting better and driving awareness. And then the third chart here I'll share with you in this drill down is kind of the same idea, but really working this from a supplier perspective and going from a reactive to proactive mindset relative to partnering with our suppliers, really highlighting the areas that we need to focus on. So just as far as outcomes are concerned, and I'll go through this relatively quickly, we did a good job of establishing baseline performance on KPIs, highlighted PO compliance as a focus area. I showed you a number of defect areas that we focused on, and I talked about value creation. DPO is a key part of that, but as I mentioned earlier about the really look at some tangible bottom line or balance sheet opportunities, right? That goods receipt reconciliation identified $3 million worth of liability reversal in a really short order. And then a key thing here was really the cultural shift, right? And the new way of thinking and the new way of attacking problems with data and leveraging business science and business insight. So again, to kind of wrap up this section, here's you've seen this a few times, right? Here are the 7 steps, right, to integrate business science with data science. And I want to leave you with this, right? When you combine the potential, right, and I call it the potential of data with the power of business insight, right? There's virtually not a business challenge you can't correct and overcome, right? And after doing this a time or two, right, your colleagues and bosses, they may be singing songs about you. So you'll have that to look forward to. But I appreciate your time. And speaking of singing songs and singing bosses, I'll turn it back over to Dan and let Mr. French take us home.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was a great talk through the 7 steps. I could further dig into the cultural issues and also that case study, which is some great stuff there. So thank you for that. We're in the last few minutes now, so you must have some questions from Steve's talk there, some great stuff. So please ask your questions, pop them into the interface right now. So I'm gonna just come in with a few thoughts here. I mean, Steve's given us great insight. I love this quote. This is Linda Candia, who's a CPO at J&J. I'm not gonna read it all out, but it's pretty obvious. And it kind of, Steve has demonstrated it really, but if you've got visibility to every transaction across your business, what decisions might you take differently? And if you have the data, I mean, it's simple, and I think we're all bought into that. The question is how, and hopefully Steve's given us some insights on that. I'd just like to kind of think about this in context. We spent a lot of time focusing on efficiency in business, best execution. How do we execute transactions in the best way? But the balancing point is, are we making the best decisions? And funnily enough, COVID's given me some sort of deeper thought on this, because we can be great at executing, but if we're not collaborating around the best decisions, we're not getting the best outcome. So it's a great balancing act. And if you think about that in terms of our priorities, in terms of initiatives, efficiency is about digitization, effectiveness is about data insight. We need to blend those two and get the right balance for the business to really drive things forward. So when you think about data-driven business processes, and this is clearly a cultural issue, it's about people, and people, all these issues are people issues, are human behavioral issues. How do we go about data-driven decision making? How do we influence? How do we get performance improvement using data? What is group behavior with data? How do we measure performance and incent teams in the organization? What about decision making and bias? Because you might think data-driven decision making is objective, but everything is biased. Even data is biased. So it's kind of an interesting thing to bear in mind. And how do we manage complexity? Now, the one thing we do know is change can be tricky, and there's resistance, and particularly with end-to-end processes, we've kind of already alluded to that behavioral issue. But a lot of resistance is often due to a lack of understanding and lack of relevance. And I think we know we can change when we understand. I mean, COVID was a great example. We made changes we couldn't have believed possible because we understood exactly why we had to do it, and we had to do it fast. So that is very true. But when we're making change and we talk about behavioral change, it's about habits. We operate in habits. We're creatures of habit. If you're going to create a new habit, there's varying views, whether it's 3 weeks or 3 months. It doesn't really matter. So, but you've got to focus on your approach to drive new habits for data-driven processes and data-driven decision making. And it's simple. You've got to have an action plan, and it's both as a group level, a process level, group level, individual level. You've got to have an action plan. What's the behavior I want, and what's the behavior I'm replacing? What are the habits I'm going to put in place? I need accountability around that, and ultimately, the hardest, most unpleasant words in the English language, self-discipline, is about getting between goals and accomplishment, and that's the issue, making it happen and following through. So if you think about what's it mean for leadership, well, you know, there's some key things. We know mastering the basics, keeping it simple is critical as leaders. Thirst for knowledge, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, challenge and overcome barriers to change, apply technology where it matters, but only when we understand the process. Avoid that kind of silver bullet mentality of trying to apply technology we don't understand the problem, and then apply this business science idea to develop comfort about data. So if I had 4 recommendations for you, it'd be these. So I would definitely encourage you to socialize the data-driven challenge as well as the opportunity. We are full of discussions around the opportunity of data, but the barriers are important, and when we understand them and socialize them, we can break them down much more easily. Educate your leadership on business science as a business discipline, not just data science as a data engineering discipline. Look, take a process for a rapid 7-step pilot, create a feedback loop to improve not just the data insights, the relevance and resonance of the specific insights, but also how business process leaders and stakeholders operate and their habits and behaviors, and you'll have great results. If you're looking at how to kickstart that process, is a workshop we've been running. It's about creating a data-driven business process culture. Pretty clear what that's about. It's kind of half a day, obviously virtual these days, but it's a helpful way to get people thinking, at least starting from the same sheet of paper or sheet of thought maybe. But ultimately, it's all about execution. We have got to execute, and one thing we've learned from this last 6 months is execution is something we can do. We can do it and put our mind to it. So that's what we talked through. I'm conscious we're a couple of minutes over. I will take a couple of your questions. We're going to run to 5 minutes over, so it's 48. So we've got 2. Right, let's have a look at some of your questions. Keep asking the questions on there if you, or you can email us and we'll respond to you as well. So quick one here. You make some interesting points. How do you recommend we get alignment on KPIs across functions? Okay, so one of the behavioral issues we discussed with KPIs is a great question. When people have got different KPIs, it's difficult to have a common understanding of anything. So aligning views, this is my kind of summary of my experiences, aligning views and expectations of performance, I guess that's critical, right? It's a key issue in making global processes work. That workshop I talked about, that's a good start. You can start yourselves by getting key stakeholders together and asking them, and I would suggest initially start them individually and eventually collectively. What does good look like for this process? The reason I start about individual is because people don't want to be challenged with complexity in groups quite often until they've thought about it. So I'd focus on what does good look like, what outcomes do we want, and then you can start to look at sub-processes and functional views and start challenging measures that don't conform to it. And it's not overnight for sure, but sometimes that data insights 7-step process that Steve described is a great way to start the debate. So that's a quick response on that. And a question here, Steve, maybe you'd like to take this. Who should be involved in your 7-step framework?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. So I'll tell you what we started with. We had functional leaders that were part of the end-to-end process. In this case, in the P2P example, we had folks from procurement, finance, we had some individuals that were more kind of at the desktop level, if you will, at the keystroke level, as far as a buyer and shared service representative. So the focus here was getting a broad segment of the process representation from all the key, I mentioned the value areas, the key value or areas of the function. And then we also obviously needed somebody from IT and someone obviously that understood the data sources, and could help us interpret that. So as a starter, that's where we began, and it served our purpose and got us to the right outcome.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. I do apologize. We've taken 5 minutes more of your time than we promised, but we're going to call it a halt there. We've got some great questions. We'll follow up the others by email. Please ask more questions. You've got those email addresses. Pop us a question, and we'll sort them out. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it thought-provoking. Hope you've got some actions you can take away from it, and enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, depending where you are. Thanks very much indeed. Goodbye.